As if life were not complicated enough, today's gospel presents with yet another paradox. We hear at the beginning of the gospel these words. Jesus said, "There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the earth distress among the nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now when you see these things begin to take place, stand up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." Stand up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Truly a paradox. As if we haven't had enough paradox in our lives over the last 2 years, we're faced with another one. We look upon the time that we've been through, the losses that we've had, maybe some gains that we've had, and we feel uncertain and insecure, wondering about what is going to happen next. And now there's a new variant, we're told, and we wonder how that is going to affect our lives. This kind of thing leads to insecurity, it leads to anxiety, it leads to all kinds of uncertainty. And in the face of those things, generally the way we handle ourselves on a communal level, on the level of our common life, is to withdraw. We seek maybe some security and some distraction online, in games online, in celebrity, in the globalization of superficiality. We find ways to cope, to do what we can so we don't have to face that unwelcome and ever-present anxiety and uncertainty. In the area of religion, the anxiety and the uncertainty drives us to a kind of doctrinal rigidity, to rules, regulations, the following of rules and regulations, rather than seeking the experience of the living God, the living experience of God who dwells within us and who loves us. In our inner lives, instead of looking at the shadow side of things, we try to avoid that at all costs. Prayer time becomes uneasy because prayer time reveals something within us that maybe we don't want to face. And so we seek refuge in other things instead of the experience of the living God. This time that we're in right now, the Advent season, is a time between the already and the not yet. The already of Christ's birth in our world and the not yet of his coming again. But you could also look at it in another way. We exist in that interim time between the already of the life that we had before, the losses that we have encountered, and the uncertainty of the life ahead. What lies in store for us as we look into 2022? How do we handle that? We could handle it by seeking security and a relief from anxiety by a flight to other things, but there is also something to be gained by facing some of these feelings head on. In addition to the post-traumatic stress disorder of the last 2 years, of what we've had to work our way through, of times when we've wondered, what's going to become of me? Will the next encounter with another person be a disastrous encounter for me? In the face of post-traumatic stress, what we're seeing now, and there's scientific proof for it, is what we call post-traumatic growth. The growth happens not when we avoid those feelings, but when we face them squarely. Fear, anxiety, fight or flight, all of these things arise from what scientists refer to as our limbic system. But that's not where it has to stay. Feelings come and go. I mean, you could wake up one morning and say, I don't feel like going to church. But as you examine things, maybe you say, well, see, going to church, I can see some people that I haven't seen in a while. And so you change your mind based upon how you work things through. Friday morning, I baptized a young girl here in church, parishioners. She's born into a world greatly different from the world I was born into, the world that you were born into. What do we give her in return? We promise to seek and serve Christ in one another, acknowledging God's presence in one another. We have an obligation and a responsibility that comes to us from God, not to seek refuge in distraction, but to be there for one another, to seek growth rather than the anxiety that we sometimes feel. And that comes about as a result of our facing these things squarely. In October of 2020, two clergy friends and I went up on the mesa on retreat at a lodge, and we were facing somewhat the same thing. We can let this thing take hold of us and ruin our lives, ruin how we see things. Is there anything to be gained from being together, facing this head on, talking about it, praying about it, and seeking what God may have in store for us? We went up there friends. We were cordial with one another, familiar with each other. But in the course of that weekend, there was a bond that developed, a bond of love, of friendship, of togetherness that has since made a difference in our lives. We went up again this last October, amazed at what had happened and how our lives had been transformed as a result of facing this head on. The scientists who do talk about this post-traumatic growth say that we should take a list. We could make a list of things. A list on one hand of what have we lost in the last 2 years. We've lost the ease of going into restaurants, eating what we want without masks. We've lost the ease of close encounters with one another. We've lost the ease of hugs and embraces, kisses in some cases. You've got to be careful who you kiss. What can we gain from all of this? Well, one thing we could gain is certainly an appreciation of what we do have. To be able to look into the eyes of someone that you haven't seen in a while with a greater sense of appreciation of who that person is and what that person means to you, that's a positive. To be able in time to embrace someone that you haven't embraced in a long time, could be family and people that you've come together for Thanksgiving, to be able to see them, to enjoy their presence, that's something we've gained. We've taken so many things for granted. But we need to examine what we've taken for granted and how we face these things in the future. Even something as simple as coffee hour, the eighth sacrament of the church. Being able to be together with each other, to enjoy a sip of coffee, to talk about each other's week, what has happened. Zoom can't do that. It is a substitute, but it is not the same thing. I don't know what the next year is going to hold for us, but I do know that if we're going to grow as individuals, if we are not going to let us shut us down in negativity, in anxiety that overcomes our spirits, we need to be able to face this in prayer, in reflection, with an awareness of God's presence. We're in the Advent season, beginning it now, beginning a new liturgical year. It would be wrong to think that Advent is just simply play acting as leading up to Christmas and baby Jesus in a manger. That's irrelevant. That's a historical fact that has taken place. The second coming of Christ is again something we have no control over. We don't know when that's going to happen. That's in God's hands. What we have in our hands is the present moment. What we do, how we react. This should be a time when maybe Christ is born in us. It doesn't matter, to a certain extent, it doesn't matter that Christ was born centuries ago. If he isn't born in us, if we can't find a way to relate to each other with the same type of love and compassion and care that he embodied when he was among us, then we could turn to each other and say, in the words of the gospel, when these things begin to take place, all this turmoil, all this chaos, when these things begin to take place, do not fear, be alert. Stand with your heads held high, for your redemption is at hand. Let it be so for us. Amen.